All right, let's see if we can sum up some of the, or make easier some of that scopes that we talked about in the last video. All right, so in the last video, we were talking about, I'm just going to get rid of this global variable because that was an interesting concept. So the other way that we can handle variables, the last way, or another way, I guess, is let's go back to this idea where we wanted to be able to, I'm going to get rid of this global variable. We're just going to make it a local variable. I'm going to declare, we've done this before, day of the week equal to a local variable. So it's only available to this particular function. So what happens then if I want to print out that day of the week? So the person makes a change to the day, and somehow I want to be able to print that change out. And one way we saw in our last video was that we were doing these global variables. But another way that you can do it is the same way that we sent data to a function. We can have a function return data to the call that was made. In other words, let's take, I'm going to get rid of this. Well, I guess I got to leave it just for kicks and grins. Let's say that main is going to want to print out that the day of the week that was received in this function. But you told me that day of the week is local. And so as it is, main does not have access to that new value. And let's just run that and verify it. So if I type in a name and I type in an age and I put in what day is it? Well, I'm going to put Tuesday, and you can see that day of the week is not defined. It doesn't know what value, it doesn't know the scope. This is out of scope, is what we call that. The scope was local. Once we left this function, we no longer had access to that variable. And so when the compiler tried to print the value in here, it didn't even know it had no idea what to do. So what we could also do, besides create global variables, is do what we call return a value. So I'm going to type the word return, and I'm going to say return day of the week. So just like we sent data to a function, our function can return data back to whoever called it. So in other words, the day of the week now, this value, whatever was put in, is being returned to, I guess, let's see, greeting is the one that called it, right? So greeting got called. All this information ran, and then day of the week was sent back to greeting, but we didn't do anything with it. We have data now. We have to put the data into a variable. Well, how do I do that? Well, let's see. We're receiving a day of the week, so that's a string. So let us do this. I'll just put the same thing. Day of the week is equal to, so what we're doing is when we call this function, we know that this particular function is returning data. And so when it's all finished, it's going to come back to this call with the data. And where is it going to put the data? Well, it's going to put the data in this variable. So greeting sends the username and the user age. The function runs, these things all get generated, a value gets put into day of the week, right here, and then that value is returned back to whoever invoked or called the method or the function, which was this particular line. The day of the week is sitting in memory and then placed into day of the week variable. This variable, remember, this is a local variable only to main. I could call this something different if that's confusing. Let's just say, let's make it even a different variable name just to keep it separate. Weekday. Weekday, doesn't matter what you call it. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is that I have to have a local variable available to receive the data that gets returned from this function. And then that data then can be printed. So let's run that. So now, I'm getting tired of typing in a name. I have a cat sitting on my lap. I'll use that. She's 5. There we go. What day is it? It's Tuesday. And you can see now that Tuesday is being printed from this print statement because it's printing the local variable that received the return value from the greeting function. So this is another way that we can send data back and forth to our functions. We can send data to our functions, or we can get data back from our functions, and we need to make sure we put the data that we receive into a variable. If I don't put a place to receive that data, in other words, I don't set up a variable to receive the data that's being returned, let's see what happens. So I'll type in a name, name and an age, and what day is it? Tuesday. And in fact, we get an error because it's expecting, oh, I guess I'm trying to print something that never got a value. So now let's see what happens. And then 21, and then Tuesday, and everything ran, but I didn't have a place to store Tuesday, so it just sort of disappeared. So unless you put in, let's put that back, make sure that you capture weekday, you capture a storage place to save the data that gets returned, and that way you can print it out. So that is returning data from a function.